Welcome to Understanding Photography with Kim Ayres, episode 94. Today we're going to be looking at a photo shoot I did with glass artist Amanda Simmons last year. We also have a critique. We've had 4 people send in images for critique. This is the Amanda Simmons photo. We have Viji has sent in a jar full of flowers, and she's wondering about the edit, so we're going to look at that in a little bit more detail and give her some feedback on that. Robert was out looking at this bridge, all lit up at night, wanted to get a photo of this. This is his edit. He's wondering if he could have done anything differently. Rosemary sent in this picture of her cat looking longingly out of the window at the birds, kind of the hunter's instinct, but sort of blocked by the window. So we're going to talk a little bit about other edits she might have done with this photo. And Nurije sent in this one of winter leaves, really. Again, thinking about the crop and the way other ways she might have sort of set up this photo. So that's the kind of thing we're going to be chatting about today. So, yeah. So, welcome. Here we are, live on YouTube. Leave me a comment. Let me know you're here. Certainly if this is your first time, let me know where in the world you are coming in from. And I can see we've got a few comments in already. We have Pat who's saying, hi from a sunny Somerset. Just left Nadal, high and dry. I'm guessing that's a tennis reference there. Ben is saying, hello from soon-to-be wet and windy Edinburgh in the UK. Meg says, good afternoon, everyone. Maggie says, hello from a still not wet or windy Castle Douglas. This is true. We were expecting wild, wet and windy weather. Could be due this afternoon at any moment. Roy is saying, hi everyone from Yorkshire, just turning a bit of bright sunshine to overcast. Rosemary says, good morning all. Rosemary's in the Pacific West America. So it sounds like the UK the weather in the UK is setting the tone for our weather here. We're expecting rain today. April says, hello everyone from snow-covered Long Island, New York. And Robert says, hi from Texas. Like the new intro. Well, if you're talking about the little logo thing, I usually do. I've been doing that every week for the last 4 or 5 weeks, I think. So obviously you've been tuning in late. Viji says, good evening everyone from India. And Jackie is saying, hello there from South Africa. So we have good morning from the Americas, we have good afternoon from Africa and Europe, and we had good evening from Asia. And Nurije is here as well. Says, hi everyone, it's sunny here in Exmouth. Excellent. So we've got weather from around the world, we have viewers from around the world, so we have a podcast to make a start on. So welcome everyone. And okay, so what I wanted to talk about today was a photo shoot I did with glass artist Amanda Simmons. Now, the great thing about Amanda is she was actually one of my very first clients. If we go back something in the region of about 12 and a half years ago, coming up to 13 years ago, I decided that I was going to set myself up as a photographer. For those of you who've been watching this for a while or know me for a while, many of you will know that I suffer from chronic fatigue syndrome. While I might be nice and bouncy and everything on these podcasts, I've usually just had a coffee. And what it means is that essentially I have a limited energy supply. I use up my energy here, I crash shortly afterwards. We all kind of use up energy and then have tired periods. Essentially, my tired periods are considerably longer and more than most people's. If we go back about 15 years or so, when I was first kind of diagnosed with this, there was always a bit of a problem. Well, what am I going to do if I don't have the full energy to sort of essentially work full time? How am I going to create a business? And I've been starting doing photography, and I was getting somewhere with it. I was finding it really interesting, and I decided to set myself up as a professional photographer, realizing that I could probably work it around my energy levels. If I was careful with how I kind of balance things, then I could do it, and essentially no one need ever know. So I set up the business, but then of course, how do you get clients? And I put out a things doing a special offer on some portrait photography if anybody was interested. And Amanda got back to me as one of my very first clients to sort of try it, and it was wonderful. Not only did I get a chance to really create some photos which she was really happy with, it sort of allowed me to feel that maybe being a photographer was a genuine possibility. What was really interesting was then, a dozen years later or so, she comes back to me now. She's moved on as a glass artist with what she does. Also, we grow as people and we change as well. And whereas the sort of first set of photos were very much about process, about the smiley, friendly artists, come visit me in my studio, come visit me, come on my workshops, come buy my stuff in a gallery. Amanda sort of now reached a point in her career and what have you, where she was wanting to sort of, what did she say? I mean, it's really this thing of, for somebody who's can be quite introverted a lot of time. A lot of artists are quite introverted, and one of the things you find is that you develop a personality which is all bright and smiley on the outside, and the minute everybody's out of the room, you kind of slump back into a little bit in a way. I'm not an introvert, but the tiredness is also a bit like that, the chronic fatigue. I've a front which people see. They only see me when I have energy. Very few people ever see me when I am absolutely worn out. And so, of course, it doesn't cross most people's minds that I could possibly be any other way. And for a lot of particularly introverted artists, there's a sense of, well, they must be kind of, bright and bubbly because that's what they put forward. Don't necessarily feel that on the inside. And there's a difference in mood, a difference in feel, and also a difference in confidence. After honing your craft, honing your art and your experiences over many years, you kind of become deeper, more settled in yourself, and there's a sense of not necessarily playing to the crowds anymore, although there's always an element of that. But there's part of kind of saying, well, no, how do I want my photos to now reflect who I am or where I am in this point? And I think the really interesting thing with Amanda was we went out to photograph her studio. Actually, I'll tell you what I'll do first of all. Let me just show you a couple of kind of things that Amanda actually does. Because when I talk about glass, that's, that could be any number of things. So hold on one sec. Let me just... That's what I wanted to do. So these are photos I took a few years ago. She's got styles which have changed since. This was during Spring Fling. I took some photos of her glass, sort of sitting when I went round to visit. So what she creates these incredible. She'll create patterns and designs, and then in a kiln she also slumps the glass. So she places a glass plate on, and then the heat sort of allows it to drop, and you get these incredible shapes that come on from it. Another year, I went out here with some other folk. Now these ones are about 5-6 years old, and her style is constantly evolving and changing. So to give you that sense of what she will do now is she'll sort of take a piece of glass, use something like this, and then she will put the different kind of coloured powders onto it. She'll mark into them. I'll come on to some of those photos in a minute. But then sort of kiln them so that the colours kind of fuse and set to the glass. So you end up with something like this. She makes marks in them, and then she will sort of put them onto into a kiln with, let's say you've got like a sort of a ridge circle. You place the glass on, and as the heat, as it heats up, the glass starts to melt, and so what sort of melt, it sort of oozes almost, gently sort of falls down into the gap, into the circle, and then that way you end up with these incredible shapes and bowls with all these wonderful, wonderful patterns in. Huge amount of time, energy, persistence, patience, skill goes into creating these things. Amanda has this she had this wonderful the shed at the bottom of the garden, where she has her studio, she has her kiln, she has all her stuff all set up. And when we went out to do the shoot, Here's a quick setup shot. You can kind of gives you a sense of what the studio looks like. As you can see here, I've got my big soft box with the grid on it. I think I've just been taking some portrait shots of her at that point, because I was playing around with different lighting setups. But one of the things that Amanda was keen to do, we discussed kind of really trying to get a sense of mood, was she wanted to have a sense of being in her studio, not under the kind of fluorescent strip lights, but to have a darker sense of mood, of shadow, of almost the kind of aloneness, not necessarily loneliness, but aloneness of the artist in her space. We did close-ups as well, and I'll show you some of them. Actually, let's show you a couple of the close-ups as well. Here we were just having a little bit of fun. For anybody who remembers, 14, 15 months ago, I did a shoot, I think it must have been coming up to Christmas, where doing mince pies and getting icing sugar kind of to snow down onto mince pies. This shoot was only done pretty much about a month or so later, so it was still quite fresh in my mind. One of the things I talked about was if you got a backlight, if you had a fairly dark background and you had a light to the side or behind the particles, then when they come down, they all just kind of leap to life. So Amanda here, she's using a tea strainer. She's got the coloured glass powder in this. It's white here, but once it's heated up, you get all the different colours. She's got her jars, so she knows what colours are going to be in each one. But then she uses this. She tapped the side of this tea strainer in order to coat where she wants things. We played around. As you can see, we've got a nice bit of side light coming in. I love these particles. I think they're sort of so much fun. And then there was another one where we tried it, and we managed to get this absolute kind of teardrop shape. It didn't take too many attempts to actually get that, but I was really pleased with the way that one came out. Then once this glass is on, she gets in and she starts marking away and making, and it's a long, slow process, meticulous, painstaking, but of course, ultimately when it all comes together, so many stages, the final result is something absolutely astounding. But to come back then to this idea of her in her space. So ultimately, this was the photo, this was the, if you like, the key photo we were going for. And as you can see from this, it isn't about the strip lights above. We've created quite a bit of shadow around her, and so she's sort of lit. Well, it looks like she's lit by this back window here and a bit of the skylight up there. In reality, the majority of this light is in fact coming from an off-camera flash over to the right, just out of sight. If you look at the giveaway here, is if you look at the edge of this piece of glass that's getting ready to be slumped, you can see how the light is catching the edge here, and then extrapolate that back and across, and actually so you can see the light is in fact coming in from the right and slightly behind this tabletop and workbench rather, and lighting her up there. If the light was actually coming from the window behind, although there was some coming, but it wasn't really strongly coming in, the shadows, her face would, the left side of her face would be completely in shadow. You wouldn't actually have the sort of partial light on that side of it. But this then ended up being a kind of a key sense of the shot. There's this sense of the artist in her space, lots of shadows, not so blacked out that you can't also see and go and explore some of all the wonderful tools and bits and pieces she has on a shelf, from bits of glass there, tape measures and scissors and all sorts of things, kind of, teapots and mugs and tablet, and there's an absolute treasure trove of a place to sort of kind of get lost in. But this was very much the kind of mood that Amanda was after, and that we had fun just kind of creating. Another shot here. This one. So here you can see now with this, she's got the powders onto the glass here. She's making the marks. But now, where do we go? Sorry. You you can see here these jars here, which have these tubs which have all the different coloured glass in, so she knows where to scoop from to get the kind of colours that she wants. So this sort of in preparation style shot, again, you can see we've turned the bench to sort of create slightly different lines into the picture. But again, we're still using that side light over hidden just on the right hand side, just immediately out of shot. I think the sunlight was getting a bit brighter at that point in the background, and I actually had to darken it down slightly in the editing process. So this was what we were doing. We were going for this kind of this mood, but with it comes I think there's a stillness and there's a confidence. There's a centeredness. It's not trying to be bright and happy and cheerful and pandering. This is me on my terms, and I think there's a lot of power in these photos, a lot of strength when you're playing around with the shadow as well as the light. It's not just about all light. The shadow becomes a really important part of these photos. We then did some individual portraits where, going back to that setup, this one here, where essentially we set her up at the end of the bench, and I had the big softbox, and so you can see this, we did this kind of this shot here was one of the portraits. Absolutely engaging, looking straight into the camera. The grid on the softbox stops the light falling off too far behind, so I've got it turned so it's coming down, hitting from this top left direction, partially lighting up her face, lighting up the side, but the shadow has dropped off, so in the background then most of the shelves are kind of lost. They're certainly not distracting us too much. You're aware that there's something behind her, but it's not really grabbing your attention. Also did close-up headshot, and again that absolute look you straight in the eye, completely engaging, confident, centered, powerful shot. And then there was one other aspect to this, which is Amanda had not long since got a tattoo done, and she wanted to have a tattoo photo. So we did using the same setup. I created this one for her as well. She doesn't tend to use this one on the glass art website of hers. Her website, by the way, is amandasimmons.co.uk. I'll put it into the video details later. But well worth going and taking a look. So this is kind of where we were at. A lot of fun. Amanda's really lovely. Her art is absolutely amazing, and it was a really fun shoot, and it was really great for me because now I've got to this point whereby I've been a professional photographer for a dozen years or more. I'm now starting to get to that point whereby people who had their photo taken from me way back come back to me now. They've changed, I've changed, we've all moved on, everybody's grown, everybody's matured, we've gone in different directions, and I'm doing more of these kind of shoots now, which is kind of revisiting people from previous years. I mean, there has been some people who I do photographs for every year or two, but I think it's really quite interesting when I'm sort of revisiting someone from 10 years back, and it's interesting just how much they've changed, but then also just how much I find I've changed as well. So that's really what I wanted to chat about. I think it was kind of a fun, interesting experience, and like I say, amandasimmons.co.uk. Do go check out her website, find out more about her art, her glass, her creations. I think you'll be quite wowed and amazed by what it is she does. So let me just take a quick look. I can see we've got some more comments in. Where do we get to? Oh, we've got one of these funny, spammy things from an Ibisoni, so I'll just remove that. April says, these are really pretty. Rosemary says, what a rich education your photography has allowed you to have, Kim. It's fascinating to hear how the various artists approach their work. The glass technique is amazing. I guess that's is part of the love of my job, Rosemary, is that photography. I know loads about photography now. Obviously, there's always loads more to learn. It's an ongoing process, and I don't think I'll ever tire or I'll ever get to an end point. But while I know enough about my photography to be able to take the kind of photos my clients need, I don't tend to know very much about what my clients' jobs are. Whether they're glass artists, whether they're a tailor, whether they're a baker or a restaurateur, whatever, that they have their skills. And then my job is to sort of sit down with them, really talk through them, what their business is, how they wish to present themselves, where they're trying to take their image, whether it's their business or just how they present themselves to the world. And then I problem solve that with the photography, but in order to be out, and the lighting, but in order to be able to do that, I have to have a deeper understanding of where it is they're wanting to go. But I feel it always feels an incredible privilege to be allowed into the world of these, creatives, entrepreneurs, makers, artists, to be able to take these photos. I never tire of that. It does always feel very privileged every time I actually go and do a photo shoot. Maggie says, beautiful work. April says, this is amazing, especially the teardrop shape. That's where we are with the, because I'm catching up on the comments now. April says, our eyes capture Amanda right away. Stacey says, good morning. Freezing outside at 16 degrees Fahrenheit. Snow-covered grounds from the storm yesterday. This is from Stacey in Pennsylvania. Sorry, late catching up with friend. Pat says, fascinated by Amanda's tattoos. April says, great portraits of Amanda. Nurije says, nice tattoo. Ben says, I love the this is me on my own terms concept of a photo, rather than putting on on a front for the camera. Yeah, I think it's a another really important point, Ben, is most people play to the camera. Well, we all kind of play, because we're taught from when we're, just wee tots, that we have to smile for the camera. We put on our camera face, and we're used to this idea that we have to present the smiley face all the time. And since I started doing portrait photography, very early on in my portrait photography, when I started doing it, I went down the route of no smiles, or avoiding smiles whenever possible. Once you remove the smile, there are 10,000 other kinds of expressions you can have, which are infinitely more interesting than a forced smile for the camera. And it's a really important part of my portrait photography is to work with the person I'm with, to try and project something which isn't necessarily about trying to please somebody on the other side of the lens. It's about kind of finding a confidence to be able to project, and then other people come to you on your terms. It's I've kind of touched on this before, and no doubt I will talk in more depth about this aspect of portraiture in the future. And Meg says, the photo shoot you've done was fantastic. Thank you, Meg, much appreciated. Right, okay, so that gives you a sense of what I wanted to do with Amanda. We'll move on now in a moment to the critique section. One of the things we'll just say at this point is, if you are finding these podcasts useful, entertaining, informative, interesting, you would like to support them in any way, then buymeacoffee.com/Kim Ayres is one of the ways you can do it. Another way you can do it as well, of course, is bring along your friends. Tell other people you know, anybody who's interested in photography, who you think might benefit from that, let them know about these podcasts, and we can grow this community. This is episode 94. We have 93 other ones sitting here on the YouTube channel, youtube.com/Kim Ayres. So you can also, there's plenty of archive material to go and dip into as well if you fairly new here, or if somebody's coming along for the first time or you're dragging them along. So please do. So what I want to move on to now then is actually just before the critique section, one of the things I've been doing is a kind of question of the week. I introduced this 2 or 3 weeks ago in the Facebook group, and this past week I put in the question, what is or are your favourite genres or types of photography that you like to create or capture? And I realised when I said, I didn't realise at the point I said it, I only realised as the answers started coming in. We had about a dozen people or so write in different things that they love doing. That maybe I should have said, what's your favourite? Or as in, a single favourite, or what do you like? Because actually, to be honest, everybody, more or less, one or two exceptions, has put in at least 4 or 5. So they like landscape, and they like wildlife, and they like architecture, and they like street, and they like portraiture, and they're trying to develop it. And I guess really what I get out of this is the fact that very few of you have specialised yet. Maybe you never will. That's fine as well. I think for me, when I started doing photography, I was doing a bit of everything because, well, everything's new, and I'm trying crocuses pushing up through snow. I'm trying interesting sunsets. I'm trying to get Highland cows in the field, and bits and pieces. But then there came a point for me a couple of years into doing photography when suddenly it was like I discovered faces. Faces just were this amazing thing. I just couldn't get enough of faces. I wanted to keep photographing faces, and I wanted the portraiture. That was it for me. And it just took me, and it's held on to me ever since. Now, that's not to say I don't enjoy doing other kinds of photography. I will still do bits of landscape and flowers and macro, and let's face it, we've been doing a lot of this over the last nearly 2 years that these podcasts have been running. And part of this is also, I get asked questions about aspects of photography which aren't necessarily my speciality, and if I'm going to trying to do my best to explain to you, I need to go out and get these things too. So this has been fun. I enjoy doing these other kinds of photography, but I will always come back to my specialism is portraiture and narrative photography, really where I'm working with people specifically to create an image. It's not necessarily so much about just capture. It does tend to be about create most of the time. And I think a lot of photographers I know who specialise, again, started out broadly, reaching lots of it, going for different things, and then either almost overnight, maybe it was one particular photo shoot they did which just kind of cemented it for them, or maybe they just gradually found that they got a much more reward out of one particular kind of photography over another, whether it's wildlife or landscape or portraiture or whatever it is. And essentially then that's where they honed in. I think all photographers enjoy playing around and doing lots of different kinds of photography, but generally speaking, there's one or maybe two that you end up really falling in love with. And I think that's kind of what I was asking, but I wasn't as clear with that. So most of the answers I got coming back were it. One interesting comment I will say that I was Peter Wilson put in a comment about the fact that, what did he say? It was something like he talked about at his camera club he'd been at. They'd hired a model, and he'd had a go at doing that and really disliked it because there was the notion of a hired model and a setup light, and essentially you're waiting your turn, you're in a queue, everybody's getting a little slot to be able to photograph the model, and it just kind of felt wrong to him, and he kind of came away feeling a bit disappointed. And I can understand that completely, because for me, when you're working with a model, it's a collaboration. You communicate with your model, you work together to try and get the kind of images you're really wanting. Having something set up and then just going and photographing what somebody else has set up, it's almost like kind of still life, but with a person instead, but even a still life that you haven't even sort of gathered the bits together and created it the way you wanted to. So I can really understand the disappointment that Peter was talking about with that. But what I would say, if you're watching this one back, Peter, is I think it's worth finding a model, or maybe start with a friend, or somebody you know who's fairly relaxed with you, and learn to photograph people that way. The one-on-one where it's safe for them and it's safe for you. That you're not that's where the relationship building comes in. That you're not going to feel like you're embarrassing yourself by the fact that you didn't get the lighting right first time, that you've taken quite a few shots and none of them seem to be working, so you have to kind of work through your process. They're not feeling embarrassed that they haven't managed to sort of give you what they think you want. When you're photographing people, it's all about building trust and building that relationship, and so both of you can feel not just relaxed but collaborative in what you're doing. there's a whole skill set out with photography, and I think it's probably why most people don't do portraiture. Is because you're very often then having to deal with other people's feelings and at the same time as working out the technical stuff with the camera as well. But I think there's a huge, well, for me, of course I'm going to talk about portraiture that way because I love doing it, but it certainly is not for everyone. I appreciate that. Jackie says, doing a bit of everything makes one a jack of all trades and master of none. Well, possibly, but at the same time, I think mastery is one of these things, maybe you master one and you then master others as you go, or, and there's a lot of transferable skills. I mean, I often think street photography is a lot like wildlife photography. If you're a good wildlife photographer, you could probably move into street photography quite easily. Street photography, I tend to think, is like wildlife, but with people in it. If you get really good at still life photography and you learn how to kind of do compositions, you can probably do a certain amount of wedding photography where you're arranging people as much as you would arrange products. So you learn composition and line and form. Well, that's probably a bit... Wedding photography also requires people and interaction skills. But the point being, though, is that, well, actually all forms of photography require composition, lighting, understanding these things, and then, bringing, and of course, your camera. Technical side of it. And that's why most of what I do when I'm talking about photography is I will talk about compositional techniques and lighting techniques more than I talk about the camera techniques. Yes, if you've got a camera, it's useful to know things like your aperture and your ISO and your shutter speed, and it's useful to know some editing techniques. But these things are almost useless if you don't really understand lighting, you don't understand composition. So that's why we tend to kind of cover these things more often. And then that way it's really less important whether you've got a big super fancy top of the range Nikon or Hasselblad, or if you're just using your phone, because composition and lighting are the most important aspects of photography. April says, I can't help enjoying more than one type of photography, but I do want to improve in each area. Again, nothing wrong with enjoying more than one type. That's not a problem at all. Like I said, I enjoy lots of them. I think it's just a case of whether you find yourself specialising, but maybe you never will. It doesn't really matter. I mean, if you want to set yourself up as a professional photographer, then you need to specialise in one. I think because sometimes there's a problem. It's like I have seen, for example, there's where you can go to somebody's website, photographer's website, and they're trying to be a bit of everything to everyone to sort of broaden and catch as many people as they can. So they do weddings and they do portraits and they do baby photos and they do, but they'll also do, they'll be selling their landscapes and their wildlife pictures, and they'll talk about street photography, and they can come and do architecture photography, and they can do food photography and product photography. And actually what happens is it dilutes everything. I mean, if you consider, if you are really wanting a good wedding photographer and you go to half a dozen different wedding photographer sites, and this one over here does weddings and sport and wildlife and landscape and product, and this one over here just does weddings, and weddings is their passion and weddings is what they do, you're more likely to go with a good person who does the weddings because they specialise in that. They're likely to be better at it, obviously depending on the quality of the photos, but by and large that's fairly true. So if you are setting up as a business, it then becomes more important to specialise so that it's then of course easier to market yourself as well. If you're not planning on setting up a business, then carry on enjoying and exploring every aspect of photography you can. Okay, so let's move on then to the critique section. So with critique, this is the point where you have the opportunity to send me your images and ask for help. If you've got images or you've got concepts and you're finding yourself a bit stuck, you're not sure, you're kind of getting there, but something's not right, you don't know why it isn't right, or you've got a photo which some people seem to like, other people don't, you can't really be sure why, send it to me. Let me know where your sticking point is, and I will do my best to help you. There's very few places I've found on the internet where you can get genuine help. That's why I set this up this way. There's a key part of these podcasts to help you get past your sticking points. Of course, I can't do that if you don't send me any images. So do send me through your images. If you are on Facebook, there's at Kim Ayres Photography is my Facebook page, but we also have the Facebook group, also called Understanding Photography with Kim Ayres. type that into Facebook. You will find the site easily enough. Join the group. And then you can put your images in and ask for feedback. If you don't belong to Facebook or you've got some moral objection to Facebook, then you can also email me your images to kim@kimayres.co.uk. And again, let me know what your sticking point is, and I will do my best to help. Right. So let's make a start then and see what we've got here. Let me just reduce that, pull that to pull that over there, click on that, and we'll start with Nurije, I think. So Nurije sent in this photo, and she said she'd gone out to take some photos of some cows in a field, I think, as much as anything else. Anyway, she ended up taking a few macro shots and tried to get that bokeh background, but not quite sure about the cropping. Should the leaves be more in focus? How, where, you know? So there's kind of bits of not. I've got something here, not totally sure. Have I gone about it the right way? I mean, first of all, I have to say, I like the photo. I like where you're coming from. That notion of, where you've got a wide aperture. We've got, you know, the leaf in the front part here, nice sharp focus, and it's not far, you know, even before the back of the leaf has curved off, it's starting to go out of focus, the ones behind, and then the trees in the background, we've got that lovely bokeh effect happening over there. Very muted colours these, we've got the sort of the browns and a little bit of blue in the sky, soft colours. And now, so because Nurije asked about the cropping, I said, well, okay, send me the original so I can see what you've got. And this is the original one. You can see unedited. That's the edited version, which has boosted things up. But so what we'll do, let's just open this into Photoshop for a moment. I should probably have opened up Photoshop before I started the podcast. That's okay, we're here. In fact, actually, I will just drag that bit over here, so that fits there. Right, so we have our picture, and what we'll do first, I'll just make a copy of that, and let's sort of do a basic edit on it, just to kind of brighten it up, so we end up more with what Nurije was playing with. So I'll press auto. Actually, I'll just, if I pull that in a bit, then you can see this thing here. So if I click auto, that's automatically brightened it up a bit. Can drag that up a bit. I'll take the highlights down a fraction, and we'll maybe play with the clarity a little bit. It's maybe actually potentially gone a little bit too bright for the style that Nurije was going with. Boost the vibrance a little bit, and we've got something like this. So this is kind of our starting point. Now, at this point, the background being similar colours to the foreground, it does become very busy. So I think there is that notion of cropping in. Now, what Nurije did was, with hers, is she's created a square crop like this. And I think the square crop works well. This is very much a kind of an Instagram style photo, really, you know, perfectly fits your Instagram page. Nice square photo. Your key leaf, the one that's in focus, is they're kind of in the middle, but it's not completely symmetrical. There's a slight tilt. It leans over. We've got these little lines coming out. This kind of curves round a little bit. So, you know, as a square crop, I think that one works. But I think there are other options here. In fact, actually, I'm just kind of thinking, let's take the brightness and contrast a bit here and just play with that contrast a little bit. I think it becomes slightly more interesting. Up that a little bit more. Yeah, I prefer that slightly richer bit. Now, really, crop-wise, there's two other ways. The square, I think, is interesting, works well, but there's two other ways you can go. One is to really just concentrate on the leaves and make it go portrait. And I think if you're doing something like this, then what we've got here is we've got this full part here where you've got the top of the that kind of curving down, brings us round and contains the shape within that. So that kind of works. that would look quite good on the phone if you've got your phone wallpaper or something like that. But another way of doing this, I think, is also if you go landscape. And at this point, what I would say is really what's interesting are these leaves down here. And if we do something like this, I think, maybe something like that, and then just kind of pull that down a little bit here. I think we end up with quite an interesting shape as well. Can we even pull that in just a fraction more, perhaps? I think. And then everything is really about. Let's the brush. Let's just get the pencil tool. And then everything is this is your shape. This is where it's happening. But these lovely curves here, we've got this sort of curve here, and it shoots around that. So we've got this lovely curve, and that then becomes much more prominent than I think some of with the other crops. You've got that little bit of leaf at the top, which also creates a different kind of curve. Other things you can do with this, I mean, really comes down to polishing up a little bit. If we take the Dodge tool, I've got that set at mid-tones, and if you could run that slightly in the shadowy parts, and what we're doing is just sort of brightening up some of the lighter bits, and then we take the burn tool and do this over the shadows and darken the shadow areas a little bit. In fact, I'll kind of just darken down a little bit on the corner. It's almost kind of slightly vignetting it as well. So that then, go to history, show you the difference then between that and that. Just sort of enriches it a little bit. And it's also a case, I think, by lightening up the highlights on this, it does help separate it a little bit more from what is a slightly darker background. But I think you were kind of doing that with your edit anyway. So really, I think it's a lovely photo. I think you're definitely onto the right point. The main thing about when you're using a wide aperture and you've got a shallow depth of field, which will give you that lovely bokeh background, is you have to decide which bit is going to be in focus. You could have focused on this back leaf, and these ones wouldn't have been in focus. But I think your choice was right here. I like the fact that this part of the leaf is in focus, but then as it curves down underneath, we end up with this edge here is also in focus. So that plane is, I think, just about the right place for it. So all in all, Nurije, I think you've got a good photo here. It's interesting. I like the muted colours. Really, crop, play. Your square crop is a great one. That's very much an Instagram crop. We did a portrait crop. That's good for kind of phone wallpaper. This one, I think, is more your kind of Facebook, or if you wanted to do like a banner or something like that. This is for sort of for looking at on a screen, on a tablet or a computer screen. That kind of slightly more cinematic or wide, that landscape format tends to work better. So, hope that helps. Hope that gives you some ideas, Nurije. Right, okay, let's close that. Let's see if we've got a few more comments here. Stacey says, I tend to do more landscape, but generally I'm willing to try everything. Robert says, wow, that opens fast. Your new PC must be top notch. Yes, yes, it is. For those who watched before, when did I get this done? I got this done. My computer got upgraded back around November. For some of you may remember, back in October, my computer died on me, and I got my son to build me a new one, which he did wonderfully. Photoshop now does open up considerably quicker, and basically, for those who are interested, I've now got a solid state drive as my kind of main C drive on the computer. And as well as having the operating system on it, I have put Photoshop and Adobe Bridge on it as well. So that actually, so Photoshop is now running off the solid state drive, which does mean it opens considerably faster than it did before. Gary says, how did you get on with the storm this week? Well, we haven't had too much, but we had some pretty heavy winds yesterday. But nothing like the storms. I think the storms in Scotland have mostly been happening over in the north and the west. sorry, the north and the east of Scotland. We are supposed to be getting some quite high winds later, but they haven't arrived yet. Pat says, such a subtle colour combo. Rosemary says the landscape version of Nurije's leaf eliminates the blue, which helps our eyes focus on that beautiful sharp leaf. April also likes the landscape crop. Question, Kim, says April, do you usually use the dodge and burn tool together? Yeah, by and large, a lot depends on what you're going for. But yes, I will quite often, I'll tend to use the dodge tool first and then use the burn tool. You've got to kind of play around with your settings. It's one of those things where it's very, very easy to overdo, because if you're not doing it very strongly, you could be doing it for ages, nothing seems to happen, and then so you turn it up and then suddenly poof, everything goes black, or poof, everything whitens out. So you do have to be you learn by doing it. So play with the dodge and burn tool for getting particular highlights if you want. And Nurije says, I quite like the landscape crop too. I shall have a go later. Thank you. Excellent. Okay, right. Let's move on then. Let's go to Robert. Robert now took a photo under the bridge that crosses the Potomac River from Virginia to Washington, D.C. And this then is Robert's picture. And he says, this is the DC side. There were coloured lights shining on the pillars. I cropped it 4:3 and adjusted the luminance and the colour saturation of some of the dominant colours. I like the photo and subject and would like to hear your thoughts on colour editing and crop. I may go back to this location if I get a chance to go to DC again. So this is the photo. We've got the bridge here and we've got these pillars lit up. So Robert sent me the original as well. So he's gone for a 4:3 crop. Couple of things that I can understand. So you've got the bridge, you've got the kind of at a diagonal, you've got these colours sort of disappearing into the background. Grab the camera, try and get these kind of things going. Now, first thought, there is just a feeling of these pillars being slightly tilted. I'm desperate to kind of just straighten them up a little bit. But okay, let's go back, because what Robert's also sent me the original, the raw file. Now, as you can see from the raw file that he's got, it's much larger and it's dark. So let's just do auto, and that kind of brightens us up and sort of puts us in the kind of realm that Robert was going for. So let's just straightforwardly open it here, and then once that's open, let's just close that one of Nurije's. So straight away, I'll just tilt that a little bit, just straight. Is that too far? I'll do that. I think that just feels a little bit better to me. Now, the next thing here, Robert, I think is what are you wanting to concentrate on? Because when we come back to your original here, what I can't help but feel is we've got this great big green pillar here that dominates. But other than a bit of texture brickwork, there's not a lot else in it. There's interesting bits. I think I like all this rundown the side here. This is interesting. But this just becomes, it grabs all the attention but doesn't really deliver. I mean, down here we've got a little boat, and there's another boat sitting up on taking out the water over here. There's interesting details. There's some reflections in the water down here which are also looking a little bit interesting, but none of these are our eye drawn to. Our eye is drawn totally to this bit here. The bridge itself, as it slants down, because our eye is drawn here, it just ends up acting like a kind of frame, almost like a vignette, drawing our attention even more to the green in the middle. Now, if we come back to here, we can see more of this bridge. So I think there's kind of slightly different ways you can come in at this. So crop-wise, for example, what you could do, I mean, if supposing you decide that actually what you really like is about the diagonal and the stuff, maybe the boats are kind of getting in the way a bit. I mean, if you sort of do something like this, maybe pull that in there. That's just a kind of a bit too much. I'm not totally sure. We're just playing at the moment anyway. Do that. You then have a very different kind of photo here. This is still strong, but we've got more bits going on down here. And again, maybe depending on how you are cropping, if you're zooming in, you take a photo like this, and you've got the line of the bridge is actually drawing our attention down the way here. So that's one way you can go about it. Other things you can do, that we've got the boat things going on down here. Did you want to kind of include them a little bit more? You know, place now. If we do something like this, we're then less concerned about the bridge, and now what we're doing is we're making a story about the boat. And in fact, actually, what I do, just gently show you, sort of bring the curve. Now, don't want that across the whole thing, so I'll just sorry, close that off, and then unmask the. Need to change that. Something like this. Then we've got the colours, but the attention now, when we look at this, is our attention gets drawn to the boat. That's in here. So with this, we've got a different narrative. We're now concentrating, whereas in your original one, you barely noticed the boat at all. So it then becomes a case of, what is it you're really wanting here? Is it absolutely about the colours and the gradations, and as they change and they go down the pillar, from the pillars into the distance? And if it is about that, you've got to be careful the fact that the one at the front is the one that's grabbing all the attention, and the others are sort of almost getting lost because the front one is too dominant. Or are you wanting something like this, where actually you quite like the fact that you've got these boats underneath here and there's stuff going on, and then the colours are acting as a kind of support to them as well. And also, just to go back to that original thing, which is where are we? If we go back to this crop, when you did your kind of 4/3 crop and you were sort of slightly more like that, you miss that sense of the diagonal of the bridge altogether. Whereas when you kind of full crop, you get more of a sense of that. And especially if you had something happening a little bit more over towards the end of the bridge here, you might get something going on. I mean, you know, there's another kind of sort of square crop kind of thing. If you do that, where now this green here isn't any wider than the red behind it, so you get much more sense of the colours shooting there. We've still got a boat here, and there's maybe ways to play with that. So I hope that gives you a couple of ideas, Robert. Again, it's that, what's your narrative? What is it that you're finding interesting? Do you want to get the light? Do you want to get the boats? Are you looking for a specific combination of the lights and the boat, or the bridge and the way that the bits are interacting? And the clearer you can kind of identify the different elements in the photo and work out what elements you feel are particularly important and the relationship to the other ones, then the easier it then becomes to work out how you take that photo, what your settings are, whether you're using a narrow aperture and a slow shutter speed, or a wider aperture and a faster shutter speed. So I hope that helps, Robert. I hope that gives you some ideas. Okay, got a couple of extra bits here. So what have we got? Robert, Anne says, Robert, love the colours. Robert says, I did notice this morning that there's a little shake in this photo. Next time I'll be prepared for the shot. Always have a little tripod with you. So you get a cheap lightweight one, or a little travel one is can be good. Pat says a figure on the boat would have been delightful. That's absolutely true. That would have. Stacey says good try on the pronunciation. Yeah, unless it's even locally, there's all sorts of places I can't pronounce right. Meg says very colourful photo. Sandy says definitely crop off some of the green pillar, which is kind of a bit too dominant. April says I like that one, very pretty, the boat and the column colours. Stacey says I love the colours, sometimes I have issues with night photography. And Sandy also says nice to have a bit of shadow on the pillows, takes away some of the artificiality. Robert says, oddly enough, I didn't see the boat until after I looked at it on the PC. That also very often happens. We get caught up with one aspect of the photo and we take the photo, and it just goes to show you how much we mentally filter out what we're not looking at. and then we get back and we look on the camera. I mean, we have this with landscapes all the time. I lost count of the number of times I would take a picture of a beautiful vista and get back and then suddenly find there's all these telegraph pylons and wires hanging right across the middle of the photo that I just did not see. My brain filtered it out, but the camera didn't. April says, you also have a diagonal with that purple on the green that I like. Rosemary says, my favourite is the square crop, maybe with nudging to the right side to eliminate that street light. Sandy says the last one is a great crop. Robert says, I think I would have moved them out of the way, but they tell a story too. Great ideas for editing. Viji says, colourful and brightening up the boat. Lovely. Roy says, can't work out the scale. How big is the boat? Well, let's just take a little look here. Sorry, let's flip over here, just kind of zoom in on the boat. Well, there's you can see the little steering column there. There's the seat. So presumably if the person's standing up, that'll be, all depends how tall you are really, whether you're short or whether you're tall. And there's a little ladder. So there's a little, oh, where did that go? The ladder coming. So that kind of, there's a little speedboat here. You can get a sense of the wheel size of the trailer. So hopefully that should give you some kind of rough idea, Roy. Okay, let's move on then to next photo. Oh no, well actually we've got a question here. A question from Roy says, I have two cards. These are memory cards which go into the camera, which I rotate. When I've used one on a shoot, I remove it, download the images to my PC. I then insert my second card in the camera. When I've downloaded the images from card one, I delete all the images and then this becomes my spare card. I was just wondering if it's okay to do this indefinitely, or will image quality suffer over time, and if so, how long? Okay, well this is kind of one of the big unknowns. So you've got your card in your camera. How long will it last? How many times can you keep rewriting over it until either the image degrades or it just stops working? And in essence, the answer is nobody truly knows. There are some estimates that these things are built to be so that you can write over them up to about 100,000 times. But not all cards are the same. Certainly you want to get the better quality ones rather than, don't get your 10 pack of 64 gigabyte cards for a $5. They're not likely to last so long. They're likely to fail much more easily. I think the idea of rotating the cards is a good one. Format the cards fairly frequently as well. Really, what it comes down to is, for the most part, your cards should be fine. But there's always a chance, even with a brand new card, that it could fail. So it comes down to the level of importance. You might have a card that's been keeping you going really well. At any moment, it might stop working or it might not. If you've got a really important shoot, have two cards, have two cameras, the full-time professional wedding photographers always have at least two cameras on them. You see the press photographers, they've got half a dozen cameras on them, and they're rotating cameras, so that even if one card fails, they've still managed to rescue, they've still got other images. So it's a case really of backup preparation. If it's really a really important photo shoot, make sure you maybe swap the cards. Some cameras have a dual card slot. My camera does. I've got two slots for memory cards. What you can do, if it's a particularly important shoot, then I will, for each photo I take, I get it to save on both cards simultaneously. And then that way, if one fails, the other one's, I've got the other one as backup. If I'm just going out for a wee wander around the woods, shoot and what have you, just for my own fun, I don't tend to bother with that because it's twice as much to have to hassle when I get home. So, kind of you pays your money, you take your choice, So, yeah, but I hope that most of them will tend to last pretty well for a long time. You just got to be prepared. Sooner or later, the card is likely to fail. If you're swapping cards, they'll last longer, obviously. But yeah, just kind of how important is the shoot? Make sure you've got backup. That's really about the best I can say with that one. Okay. Right, what else have we got here? A couple, right, after Roy's comment on the boat, April says, little fisherman's boat. Viji says, definitely you should be writing a book. Your ideas and views on this are great as well. Oh, thank you. Rosemary says, great question about the cards. Since the XQD cards are $100 US, I hope they last a really long time. Yeah, you would hope that the ones that you spend more money on are likely to last longer. But sometimes there is also, I would say, there's another quick thing, which is about filling your cards. Don't necessarily absolutely take it to completely full every single time. Take it up to about 90%ish or something like that. Actually I could shoot off on all sorts of technicals, which I think would keep me, but yeah, I think what I've said probably covers it. All else fails, Google it. I'm sure you'll find more information. But when you are buying cards as well, check the ratings. See whether people are mostly happy with it, or whether there's a lot of people turning around saying these cards fail and they're not reliable. Okay, so next up then, we'll talk about Viji. So Viji sent this. Tried taking a photo of these flowers. This first one. This one's the edited one, and this one's the original uncropped. The jar is tilted. Is that a good idea, or should I place this straight? And wondering kind of which one is better to go for. Well, I think they both have something going for them, Viji. The crop kind of pulls us in. Part of the feeling here, I will say, is that the edge of the jar here feels very, very close. And in fact, you've lost the tip. There's a little bit here whereby, you know how we talk about this notion of leaving space in front of. So if you've got somebody walking into the photo, you want to have slightly more space in front of them than you have behind them. If somebody's cycling, if there's a car driving or a plane flying, or even when we've got like a flower turning into the photo, even if you're doing rule of thirds or something, you want to have the flower, you want to have the extra space kind of in front of the flower. Whichever the way, if the flower's pointing this way, you have the extra space over here. If the flower's pointing this way, you have the extra space over here. And because you've got this jar tilting to the left, you really want to make sure there's a little bit more space to the left in front of it, I think. I think it's fine to have that. I think the idea of the tilt is fine. Again, it kind of depends what you're going for. I cropped in better. I think this. Where are we? When you cropped in, I think the tilt gives it an energy which, if it was just straight upright, wouldn't have as much energy to it. But if this was, okay, let's just open this with Photoshop for a moment as well. And if I do the content aware and just pull this over in front a little bit, just pull that up a fraction and see how that does with filling it in. Yeah, something like that, just as simple as that. And you can see from that to that, kind of give it room to breathe. But it's about having a little bit of space in front of it. I think tends to work a little bit better. Then it's really a case of deciding what bit is grabbing your interest. What's the interesting part with this photo? Again, if we go back to your original, well, you're trying something else here where you've got a bunch of leaves on the ground. So again, if you were to take this over a little bit, let's just do that so that the content aware works. Now, this is obviously added in a bunch of sides that we don't actually need, but so let's just darken that down for a moment, just so we can we're not getting too distracted by that. And again, you can see that there has more of a sense on it. Now, are you on the edge of the table there, or is there just not quite sure there's something going on here? It looks like there's a line kind of cropping in here. So you want to play around, make sure if you're having the full size, we've got this, looks like you've got your backdrop hasn't worked its way fully across. So I think you want to have the backdrop spreading so that we're not actually getting distracted by this lighter patch over here. And then it's a case of what you're wanting to do with the flowers. What's important here is the flowers down the bottom and the top. If it's the relationship between the top and the bottom, are you really quite interested in the middle? It feels quite dark, this. I think, well, let's just brightness and contrast. If we just bring the brightness up a little bit, I think that becomes interesting. Again, there's a notion of even the sort of dodge and burn on this, where we can brighten up parts of this, and again, a little bit of burn, create a little bit more depth, and it allows the colours to kind of pop a little bit more. Possibly slightly overdone it there, but it gives you a sense anyway of this. So really, I think with the crop, you want to have that room in front. Whether you're talking about the crop being, you know, this, where you're wanting the whole thing, in which case you have to also think about the surface that it's sitting on and the background, or whether you're wanting to crop further in, so it's just about the lid and this, or whether you're wanting part of that jar handle. Another thing with the handle, what would happen if you turn the handle round, so that actually, because the thing is with the handle here is it's sort of partially lost in the shape overall of the let's use the pencil tool, that's what I was trying to do. So this handle here is kind of getting lost in amongst the jar itself, whereas if you rotated this jar counterclockwise about 90 degrees, the handle would then kind of come out the side. You might then, of course, need a slightly wider shot to get it. How would that have changed the composition as well? Might not have worked so well. Or if you didn't want the handle, if you sort of essentially turned this almost 90 degrees so the handle was on the opposite side, you wouldn't see it at all. You would just have the jar. There's other aspects here where you know, some quite interesting stuff going on just inside the jar itself. You know, can you make some interesting sort of shapes and almost abstract patterns here? So there's quite a few options to play with this Viji, but I think certainly from your original photo it's a bit dark, and you also need a bit more space on the side, and you need to kind of work out the background. But other than that, I think there's lots of really lovely ideas. I like that idea with all these beautiful flowers. There's an interesting, that kind of purpley blue, indigo and green colour scheme going on. The fact that the glass is sort of slightly distorting and changing the intensity of the colour on the ones on the inside. I think there's a lot to, it's worth going back and exploring, I think. So anyway, I hope that gives you a few ideas to play around with Viji. Right, where are we at? Okay, Roy said he had to leave early. Viji says room to breathe, yes. Pat's wondering if Roy's run off to go and see the tennis. Rosemary says, I like the crop Viji as it removes the background distraction, also like the added negative space on the left breathing room. Sandy says, is the context the spilled leaves and petals? Viji says, good crop, works better. Rosemary says, must scoot, also got to disappear. Have a wonderful week, everyone. Viji says the handle, I was a bit conscious about that, not sure how to angle that. All right, and then goes on, right, I've answered the question. Okay, cool. Right, okay, on to the last image then. And we're talking about Rosemary. Now, Rosemary took several dozen shots of her housebound hunter, as she calls it. So here we have the cat. The cat's gaze, excuse me, is riveted on birds pecking at bugs and worms just off the porch. What drew me to the shot, in addition to the cat's focused gaze, was the soft light and leading lines. I processed it with the goal of drawing the viewer's eye to the cat. There are two versions. Anyway, so we've got this, I think, and this. So this is kind of more like probably the original crop, although she's darkened down the background a little bit more with that. If the goal of the shot is to convey the story of a cat pining to be outdoors and chase the birds, what could I have done more clearly? One thing I learned after this morning of attempting this shoot is that it's much easier to start the shoot with a clean window rather than try to erase kitty nose prints off the glass after the photo is taken. Lesson learned. And that's very true. If you're photographing glass, it's worth polishing it up first, because just like Robert didn't really notice the boat until afterwards, we can take photos and not notice all these smudge and fingerprints and greasy prints all over glass until after we're back on the computer, and it's a nightmare trying to remove it all. So, thoughts here then. I think, again, we've got different options with how you want to kind of crop this. So, okay, let's just close these ones from Viji. And I think one of the things I would say is you're kind of almost tempted to kind of come down. There's not necessarily a lot of space up there. And if you crop down here, that's, brings us in. But I also I kind of get the feeling like I'm sitting above the cat a little bit. And I think actually, Rosemary, if you lowered yourself a little bit, if you sort of come down, I mean, really only about 4 or 5 inches, and actually being right level with the cat's head, rather than looking slightly down on the cat, I think that would have been better. Because what we're really trying to do here, I think, is get into the sense that it's the cat and the cat's looking out the window. Maybe a little bit more space to the left or behind it as well. I do feel the cat's bunched up on one side. If there's any way of having got the cat closer to the window, could have been fun. The gap between the cat and is quite exaggerated. But I don't know, at the same time, I like this in the space, but I do kind of feel like I almost want... Actually, I'll tell you what, let's just go back a bit here. And I want to come out a little bit from the cat. Get the cat slightly more into that rule of thirds. Maybe come down like that. I don't know how well this is going to fill in the gap of the cat. Yeah, maybe just from that to that. Gives us a slightly better kind of feel to it as well. Like I said, but I keep wanting to kind of drop down a little bit more. I think also there's a notion of what you're wanting to do with the editing. If I just go into, because it's fairly muted, although that kind of gives a nice soft light. You can sort of punch it up a bit, something like that. You can play around with the clarity a bit and kind of, create a little bit more depth and texture. Although that seems to have created a bit of a dark patch there, maybe boost the colouring a little bit. So there's kind of things you can do with that. I think other things, though, are really about how much... If there's a notion here again, if the story of the cat looking out the window, if you come back a little bit more, get a bit more of the cat, a little bit more of the window, but that space of then the cat being indoors, this kind of feels just a little bit too close in. You can see I've already tried stretching it out a bit, but it still kind of feels a little bit too close in. The alternative is to actually go much closer in. And here, if we sort of start playing around with the crop, tell you what, let me just show you what I mean here. If you go something like this, then we've got enough of the window in to know that the window is there. But now it's much more about the cat's face. So we know still that the cat is looking out the window, but we don't necessarily need... So if either you're trying to get a big sense of the context, or you're trying to... I think you need to sort of zoom in and get a sense of the cat. For that matter, I noticed because you've sent me the high resolution original image, we can zoom in, and I love these reflections in the eye here. Now, we're really pushing it. I'm at 300% here, so 100%. But you go to something like this, and we're now actually... You've got part of the cat. So this is where you really want your macro lens, or if you're sitting back, just zooming in that. If the cat's sitting still enough and you can get the focus in just the right place, there's a rich part here to be had with the eye. And again, this is where you sort of just a little bit of dodge and burn, where we just slightly lighten that up and then darken the darks and just make that eye pop a little bit more. And there's a point here whereby when we get in really close, point being, when we get in really close to this eye, we can see the reflection of the window and the blinds in the eye, and that becomes the story in itself. Is that you don't even have to see the blinds because you in the photo, because we can now see the blinds in here, and with it we can then read that and go, right, this cat is now looking out of a window. Now, no good for one of these online competitions where everybody's scrolling through at high speed, but for a photo where people are taking a little bit more time to look at the photo, it could be a bit of fun. But I think this kind of, if you do then want the photo, this kind of close in here works well as well, where we've got the cat's head and we've got enough of the window to know that the window is there. We're also getting still close enough to start seeing these stripes of the blinds in the cat's eye as well. Possibly about there. I think that's quite possibly. That's probably about as far out as I would want to come. I don't think we really need. So it's either that or it's much further back and get more of the cat in, more of the window, and have that sense of the inside of the house, I think. So I hope that gives you a few ideas, Rosemary. I realise, of course, that on the live version you've just had to disappear. So hopefully you'll catch up on this on the watch this back afterwards. So that pretty much brings us to the end of this one. Okay, a couple more comments. April saying, have a great... Everybody's deserting me. They're going charging off, right. Sandy said, would be nice to see more of the blurred green through the blind to give maybe an idea of what the cat might be looking at. Viji says, if only we can see a bit more of that eye, that would be amazing. Pat's also saying, thank you, must fly. Nurije likes the reflection in the cat's eye as well. So, excellent. So that, like I said, that kind of brings it. Now, next week we've got there's space for another critique section. So do make sure you get your images into me if you would like some kind of feedback, or if you've got questions like Roy's about the camera, cars, or anything to do with photography, ask. Leave me a question, email me a question. Send me a photo, email it to me, put it in the Understanding Photography with Kim Ayres Facebook group. Now, I think it might get changed, but my plan for next week is to talk about the notion of photographing love. This is in the fact that in 2 weeks' time, we're on to Valentine's Day, and I'm pretty much planning on sort of setting a love photo challenge. So next week I'm going to talk about that notion of love, what we're talking about here. And really what I'm talking about is relationships with people. I'm not talking necessarily about a picture of a tile in the shape of a heart, or, you know, just drawing a heart in the sand. There's maybe more to do with people and people interacting with each other. But I'll play around a little bit with that idea. I will give you a wee heads up as well about the fact that in just over a week, in the week beginning Monday the 7th, I'm going to be doing 3 short live podcasts in the evenings. Now, dates to still be said. It might be the Monday, Wednesday, Friday, or it might be the Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday. That hasn't been pinned down. I'll be able to give you more details next Sunday. I'm currently doing a job for the Kukubri Galleries, where they are going to be setting a competition for photos of Kukubri and the surrounding area. And part of that is I'm going to be running 3 short podcasts on the notion of narrative, composition, and lighting. Now, if any of you would like to turn up to that, I'll give you all the details next week, and it would be great to see some of you there for sure. So, just planting that seed there. Meanwhile, if you find these podcasts useful, interesting, entertaining, you would like to support them, then buymeacoffee.com/Kim Ayres. Right, that's it pretty much. I think everybody's now running away, saying goodbye, good night. So that brings us to the end. Thank you very much to everybody who sent in the images. Thank you to Roy for sending in the question as well. Thank you to all of you who've left comments and helped make this podcast very interactive and fun and interesting. I hope you found it useful, and I look forward to seeing you all next Sunday. Take care. Bye-bye.